Right then, image assets complete, animation assets complete, and audio assets complete. That leaves one last asset type that I said I would cover, and that's the particle assets. And I'm saving it for last because it's going to be the lengthiest. It's going to be error prone because we're going to be filling out a lot of fields for this. Rather than a lengthy build up, let me just go ahead and create. This will be my square particles, and this is a particle asset. This is where the scheme is really going to save my skin. I'm going to have to make a lot of room for this. A lot of fields to fill out here. So a particle asset will be used by a particle player. Instead of a sprite, I'm going to have a particle player. It's going to consume this, and it's going to use the particle information to show some really nice effects. Now, the particle I'm going to create is very basic. It's not going to look pretty, but it is going to be a proper emitter. Now, like all assets, as I mentioned before, bare minimum, I need an asset name. And it's going to be called square particles. This is what I'll feed to my particle player. This is where it starts getting a little more interesting. A particle asset is going to have children, and those children are particle asset emitters. And inside of there, it gets even deeper, where a particle asset emitter has its own fields. So let me just try and get this popping up. I actually need to close this off. Get rid of that. Look at that, beautiful. Particle asset fields and particle asset emitter. And a particle asset can have multiple emitters, and that's what's doing real magic. So I'm going to create particle asset emitter. Just try and do my best to make it look fancy. Each emitter name, or each emitter can have its own name. And this is going to be, this emitter is called moving squares. And it does take in an image much like an animation does. And let me double check the name of that. Squares image. And again, just like in XML, I'm going to be careful and close these off properly. And the next part is, well, I'm not getting many suggestions right here. And I have to think, okay, what's going on here? Well, particle asset emitter has its own fields. So as soon as I start typing here, that's when I get my auto-completion. Alright, so I have fields, or the emitter has fields. I personally don't have them. And inside of here, I'm going to start filling these out. This is where you start adding in data keys. And data keys will be assigned to a property or assigned to a field, and it's going to tell me what the value of that particular field is at a certain time. So let's do something really simple. The quantity is a good one. Oh, I need to get this closed off at the right spot. There we go. These are my particle fields. And you see, I'm not getting things like, oh heck, I'm not getting things like sprite or image map or image asset or anything. This is specifically wanting, for instance, quantity. And inside of a quantity, I would have a key. And a key is really basic. It's not going to have sub-elements, so it has a time and it has a value. And now I've successfully added a single field on my particle asset emitter, which is named moving squares, which is part of my particle asset named square particles. And I'm just going to keep filling this out basically to create kind of a growing square that's a little transparent. So quantity variation is also going to have a key. And I'm just going to keep typing and typing, and hopefully we should have a proper one working after this. Well, going through my checklist of what this tutorial was going to cover, I think that would wrap this up. If I were to do a recap, I had created a simple module, which was my assets, that had a single version, and I defined it using this module definition. And inside of there, I specified that I'm declaring assets associated with this module in the assets folder with the extension of asset.taml. And I created a very basic script that will plug this into the Tort2D sandbox, basically making this a toy. Named the same thing as my module. And then I created my folder hierarchy based on how I like to create it. You know, I could have easily dumped all this into one folder, but I like to be a little more organized. And I had created asset definitions for each of the raw files that I needed. And in this case, they were image assets and a music asset or audio asset. And then I developed some animations that used an image asset right here. And then I created the very fun yet complex and time-consuming particle asset that I played. And you can find a lot of these asset definitions in the Tort2D repository. We have the toy assets. We're going to have a particle assets coming up soon with a particle toy that'll have a lot more particles you can dig into and reuse. So don't let this tutorial be the end of your education. Go and create your own particle assets. Go and define your own image assets. Check out the various toys and examples inside of the sandbox and get a good feel of what you can do with this, because I wouldn't say I'm just scratching the surface. I actually went in pretty deep with creating assets, but there is more to it than this. And if you go to our wiki on GitHub, the GitHub page for Tort2D, you'll see there's a really lengthy doc on the asset system as well as the module system, and then we have tutorials that just go into quickly creating an asset or pulling in assets from another module and then creating games out of that. So before I get too much further into my rambling, I'm going to call the video done at this point. Hopefully this is useful to people. If you want anything that I may have shown in this video, if you want the assets or you want my, say, app code templates, then just leave a comment on the video, probably host it on YouTube, or go to our forums on garagegames.com and post a request there as well. So thank you for taking time watching and being patient with my various breaks and tapping on the keyboard. I hope to grab your attention on future videos. Quantity variation is going to have a single key. I'm actually going to add in all the fields and then come back to them to fill out the keys, just so I know which ones I need to remember to fix. And I honestly think of all the editors, it would probably be the most handy right now would be a particle editor, because this is a really complex asset put together. And I want to start collapsing these again just to prove the point. I have my single particle asset, and it has an emitter, and the emitter has fields. If I wanted to add multiple emitters after I do the closing tag for the moving square ones, I would start over. So each particle asset can have multiple emitters. I'm not going to get into that. I just want to create something really basic. And I filled out my quantity variation, and now I need to do the keys. And I haven't quite decided yet if I'm just going to edit this part of the video out and just speed it up, or if I'm just going to let the dead air go on. So I'm not going to really say too much. What's going to get important is, so far each field has essentially had a single key, single keyframe of the particle state, and a lot of these I'm showing that are actually kind of defaults, but it's nice specifying. Let me jump down to one that's a little more interesting. Size X life. This has multiple keys, meaning at different points in time I want to have different values. So at 0 you're going to be 0.3, this particular image, this particle, or I'm sorry, the square's image. But then at the final time, it's going to have a value of 1. Let's think about that for a minute. At the start of the emission from this particle, the x, the life of the x value is going to be at 0.3, so scaled down. And then at the 1 second mark, or the 1 duration mark, it's going to have a full 1.0 scale, so be back at its original size. And it can get pretty crazy too. I mean, you can have many keys, just like you can have many emitters. So I'm going to create multiple keys. And before I write any actual input, I'm going to need probably 1, 2, 3, 4, so I can get rid of these last two. Time of 0.0, or I can just make that 0. But since it is a float value, I'm just going to specify it on purpose. Time of, so this is kind of an overtime thing happening. I'm going to increment it. So if you kind of think about what's happening of the data for the alpha channel over time, at the beginning, basically invisible. Then it starts increasing the alpha channel, so I can actually start seeing it, and then it fades out from, it goes to 0.2 to 0.1 to 0. So it comes in and it comes out. Let's see, what did I miss? Yep, size X. Go back and set these up. Now if I were to mess up something, do something maybe a negative time, may not give me a warning. But as soon as I put in text, it doesn't want that. Alright, so I was at size X, 0 to 72, changing the size X life, and honestly I think that particle is probably ready to show. I'm checking over everything. It looks like I'm not getting any errors with my XML. So let's just jump to it. Let's create a particle effect. Very simple one too. Or let's make use of our particle effect via a particle player. I'm going to put it right over where I put my soldier. You probably can't see that, so I'm going to scroll it down. There we go. This right here, particle player dot particle, is where I use my asset. Let's double check my name. Yep, square particles. Now I don't specify the emitter, I use the asset name. Always keep that in mind. Don't get those too confused. And I add my particle player, again, not my particle asset. And reviewing this, it looks like I have all I need. So fingers crossed, let's look at this. There it is, look at that. That is my particle. You notice it's not an image, it's not an animation. It's essentially, my particle player is going to my particle asset and say, what are your emitters? And it'll start pushing the emitters, and those emitters will spew out particles. And in this case, the single particle was this square. And over time, it makes some changes. It grows, it goes from invisible to a strong alpha, and then it weakens out again.